So I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel, and I want to acknowledge that we are regrettably missing one of our other panelists, Detective Gloria Reyes. She was not feeling well today, and I know she really wanted to be a part of this conversation and discussion with us. Chief Koval mentioned she'd been talking about it for over a month since we extended the invitation, so our thoughts are with her as she recovers. Hopefully she's doing well and will be back in good spirits and good health fairly soon. Nonetheless, we have still, I think, a very distinguished panel with us. To my immediate left, your right, Chief Riseling, Chief of Police for UW-Madison, Dr. Floyd Rose, current president. You see, you got a groupie here, huh?
Yeah.
Right?
Fan club.
Right.
Where are my groupies?
Right. Woo, there it is. Right.
Thank you.
Now, see, there'll be a group even more if we get free dibs on parking and we didn't have to get parking tickets, right? I'd be a groupie too, right? And then to my far left, Chief Koval, as we say, the new guy. Yeah.
That's very gracious.
So I've asked these individuals to prepare about 5 remarks to sort of set the conversation for us today. We're talking about law enforcement, we're talking about community relations, and we're talking about race. And to a certain extent, we're talking about a lot of things that have happened in the last, say, 3 to 4 months, particularly Ferguson comes to mind. Although I don't want the conversation just to be limited to Ferguson, we really want this to be a Q&A session. So they're going to talk a little bit. I have a few questions that I want to ask them. I need you all, folks, to get involved, especially in this conversation. So we have the 2 microphones that are on the stands. I'd encourage you to use them, in part because we're recording this. And so when we shout out from our respective seats, we don't get that audio for the video. So if you do have a question or comment, please, please, please make your way to the microphone to share that so we can get that for our archival purposes. But with that said, I'll turn to Chief Koval there in the far left. He thought he was going to go last. But,
I was hoping on that.
Right, he's going first. We asked him just to give us, from his perspective, his bird's eye view, what are the key issues as relates to community, law enforcement, and race? Chief?
Well, having been raised in Madison, spent all my grammar school and ultimately high school and college years here, have certainly seen sort of an evolution of a sort, and I understand that there's many institutions at play working against or counterintuitively. But of course, the thing that I think is made more manifest with our response in looking at challenged neighborhoods in the city of Madison has to be sort of a piggyback comment that we all gleaned from the Race to Equity report a year ago this November, frankly. And that is, I see a growing chasm between the haves and the have-nots in the city of Madison. Nowhere is that more self-evident in our neighborhoods. We have probably 120 plus neighborhoods in the city of Madison. And most recently, we have 11 neighborhood officers assigned to some of our more entrenched areas, quite frankly. And when I came in on May, I asked my 5 district captains if I could beg, borrow, or steal some more neighborhood officers, how best did I think I could employ them? And so I asked them for a needs assessment of their various districts. And in response to that question, I had at least from each district captain, no less than 6 neighborhoods that are teetering that could go one way or another. So when you consider that almost 30 neighborhoods in Madison, or about 1/4 of our community, has considerable issues of need, things that are having a disproportionate call on police resources to deal with the manifestations of those needs. That's something that came very starkly into my sort of viewpoint in that sense. And I think that we also have some things that we're looking at in terms of community, in the sense that I view my litmus test on moving forward in success in Madison based or predicated on 2 domains, one of which I've already spoken to, the neighborhoods and the challenges that we see there with communities that are increasingly becoming more steeped and entrenched in issues, again, I think that are first and foremost of poverty, and as a subset of that, of course, issues of race are paramount. But I also see that in our Madison Metropolitan School District, we have yet another defining moment that sort of gives me a gauge of where I see us 3 to 5 to 10 years from now. Currently, the City of Madison Metropolitan School District has about 27,000 enrolled children. And of that, one of the starkest things that I can see coming out of that is over 65% of that contingent qualify for subsidized meals. So when you look at that, it sort of goes back into the original predicate I had, in that those two areas, gauging Madison as community, one, the neighborhoods, two, the schools, if we accept that those can be microcosms of a greater society, that's where I think my emphasis has been looking in moving forward. And then quite frankly, in terms of how in fact then does policing contribute to that, or are we responsible in part for that? Part of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that I've seen played, and I'm sure Chief Riseling has too, for the last 30 years, in that the semantics, the words we use, can be disturbing at several levels for me personally, because words have great power. And what we've seen in terms of the choice of phraseology, the war on crime, the war on drug, the war on terrorisms, and I think it's become particularly peaked in a post-9/11 world, is that you see the police as manifestations of that, sort of as a self-fulfilling prophecy of a sort of amping up, gearing up, and reflecting some of those mores that we see depicted in our popular media and press accounts. So when a chief of police can get 10 to 12 magazines sent from the various trade journals that we receive, and if I look at the front cover and it looks almost seamlessly like somebody that could be posing for soldiers of fortune or mercenary for hire, that gives pause, because it really subscribes to a warrior mindset that unwittingly we are being drawn into as that vortex goes, which is why we're trying to create a new paradigm shift of a sort and trying to reinvent ourselves more, looking at our relationship as a fiduciary trust to the community, that of guardians. So I think we've got a lot to work to do in that capacity, but I think it's a challenge that we're up to.
Dr. Rose.
Well, not being the extemporaneous speaker as Chief Koval, I'm going to read my remarks. And this is to try to provide a platform of where we might be regarding our discussion and moving forward. Shortly before Christmas of 2013, I met with an elected official in our city. My sole objective was to encourage and insist that people of color, especially African Americans, would be given opportunities of employment. Toward the conclusion of my requested meeting, the official stated that he had a topic he would like to discuss if I had time. I stated sure. The official then told me the story of 14 African American youth who had been arrested all at the same time for theft. These middle school youth, who by the way are students in the Madison Metropolitan School District, in an organized manner converged on a local store and took coats off the racks and then traveled home on a Madison Metropolitan bus. Well, taking a page from the world's dumbest criminal acts, the youth quickly learned that each Madison bus had a video camera, and the camera on the bus in which the youth traveled home was working that day. Their images were captured with the stolen property. The elected official asked if I and an organization in which I'm affiliated would be interested in working with the youth. I stated that I would like some time to canvass my membership regarding their availability to take on such a major volunteer project. We agreed to connect after the holidays. So in January of 2014, I contacted his office and expressed that my organization would move forward and do what they could to help the kids and try to help them to get back on the right path. Shortly thereafter, the elected official who had officially spoke with me called a meeting with a number of paid city workers to discuss what could be done for these children. Police officers, social workers, neighborhood center representatives, city administrative staff, and myself. During that meeting, all presented different scenarios and weighed in on what should happen. When asked what I thought, since normally I'm the most wordy person at the table and had made no comment, I expressed that I saw an absence of our combined group. I saw no parents, and I saw no representatives of the school. The gentleman to whom the youth were remanded for adjudication stated, well, that's because the parents, in some cases, are not interested, and these kids don't talk to their teachers. I expressed that his comment was very revealing, and I now understand one important aspect of the makeup of the students. They cannot read. As everyone in the room mentally asked themselves, what was I smoking? I shared, any middle school student who does not talk with teachers is clearly not engaged in school, and everybody should know that. And I would bet everyone in the room a Krispy Kreme donut that not one of those children can read proficiently, if at all. And these youth have been disengaged for some time because they do not have the skills to be successful in the classroom. And as they receive discipline for their actions, that discipline will address the symptom rather than the problem. Irrespective of the consequences for their actions, whatever they may be, they still will not be able to read. The aforementioned is a microcosm of the paranoia and panorama that is destroying the future of those innocent children who are without means or responsible parental support. Now understand, in most of these situations, the only real crime that these kids committed initially was that they could not select their parents. For reasons beyond understanding, it has become acceptable for children to be illiterate if they are poor and without parental intervention. As a result, it has been cited that many cities of our country, for example, Milwaukee, that only 3 out of every 100 African-American male youth below the age of 18 can read proficiently. In Madison, it has been alleged that there are 2 elementary schools in the school district that not one African-American can read proficiently. And to go back to what Chief Koval had stated regarding poverty, of the 27,000 students in the Madison Metropolitan School District, 7,000 of them are African American. And one statistic that I've quoted many times and never been affronted on is that there's not 500 of those 7,000 students that can read at grade level. The time to address a cure for this problem is not when it is realized by the negative, unproductive actions of middle or high school age youth, but during the first years of their lives and during school. Forbes magazine uses 4th grade reading scores to project the number, or Forbes magazine cited that in Texas and in other states, 4th grade reading scores are used to project the number of prison cells that are going to be needed 10 years later. In Wisconsin, I believe a similar scenario exists as throughout the United States, although there are some modifications to that. But understand that 60% of America's prison inmates are illiterate, and 85% are juvenile. Sadly, the percentage of criminals who have reading illiteracy problems is not surprising. What is shocking, however, is how many kids are at risk of illiteracy. And today, fully 67% of all American 4th graders can't read.
Great, thank you, Dr. Ross. Chief Riseling.
Well, I'm so sad I don't even know. Wow, that's stunning. Thank you for that. A little bit of background, I guess, to start off with. I was born in Washington, D.C., and grew up in Washington, D.C. During the 1960s, and watched the very ups and downs, if you will, of that decade with the civil rights movement. And it's the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And I think it's an interesting thing to have 50 years, I'm old enough to have 50 years of perspective on this. One of the things that I really like about the Washington, D.C. area, and I was glad that I grew up there, is it's a very diverse area, And you have thousands and thousands of examples of people at all different parts of the social strata and economic strata that are diverse. And when I moved to New York, I found that to be somewhat similar too. And then when I moved to Wisconsin 23 years ago, the first thing that struck me was that this was the whitest place I had ever lived. And I didn't just mean the snow, right? This was by far totally. And it struck me as really strange because I had never lived in a place where so many white people lived that had little to no experience with other cultures or other races. And I found myself not realizing that the other white folks didn't have the same experience, and therefore the assumptions I was making about their cultural proficiency, their diversity proficiency, their understanding of the differences and similarities, but differences between different types and groups of people, that my assumptions were wrong. And it took me a while to realize just kind of how, in some ways, behind, if you will, these very well-intentioned white folks were. So we'd get into these discussions about, affirmative action and whether or not we should have affirmative action. And I always thought that was fascinating because we've always had affirmative action. It's just been the question of which group has it benefited. Up until, say, 20, 25 years ago, all the affirmative action programs benefited whites in America. There was always affirmative action. There was affirmative action for white males in this country for the first couple hundred years of its existence. And so we've tweaked affirmative action over the years, but this idea that we should somehow eliminate affirmative action I always find to be kind of comical. The thing that I always heard was, well, we have a level playing field. There's this level playing field in the world, and I'm always struck by that because I've never played on a level playing field. Being a woman in law enforcement, the field has never been level, and I just bear a gender difference. But I know that whatever field you walk onto, the field is definitely not level depending on your race, your creed, color, gender, sexual orientation, transgender, and sometimes even your politics. The field isn't level. And so I've thought about this a lot in the 50-some years that I've been on this earth because it was so clear to me growing up. And my high school was very diverse. We had just a different experience from what so many other people have experienced that are in the Midwest and white. And what I've kind of concluded is that, for me, education is the great equalizer. That education really is an important key to opening up minds, opening up opportunity, opening up a world of creativity that we need in this country. So the statistics that Dr. Rose just shared really make me sad because if my theory that education is the great equalizer is correct, then my theory's in real trouble with action or with result. If all the statistics are true that Dr. Rose cited, and I have zero reason to question the validity of his data, then we're worse off than I think I might have realized. So I couple this with kind of the history of law enforcement, and Chief Koval alluded to this growth of the warrior movement in law enforcement in the last 15 to 20 years, the militarization of police. Some people will talk about it that way. I see this as just kind of, when you look at the history of law enforcement, let's just take in my lifetime in the 1960s, especially in the South with the Freedom Riders and such, there were people in our profession, police chiefs in our profession, who used their office to really deny people their very basic constitutional rights, very, very basic. Form a march and get blocked on the bridge at Selma. The fact that the ranks of policing were so integrated with the membership of the Ku Klux Klan for years and years, and we're actually starting to see a bit of a resurgence in that in American law enforcement, is to me very frightening, and it comes out of a frightening history. And so I don't know when law enforcement ever has had the complete trust of communities of color. Like when they say, well, you know, people used to trust the police. No, white people used to trust the police. I don't know that people of color have ever trusted the police. And when people say, well, you know, we've got to trust the police. If we don't trust the police, you know, what's the alternative? Well, really? I mean, I think that the police have had this really very poor, sometimes downright criminal history with communities of color. So we haven't reached a level in law enforcement where we're starting from a position of trust with communities of color. We certainly reached a place where we were starting with Caucasian America and positions of trust, but now even that is beginning to fray. If you look, I think it's beginning to fray for white Americans as well. And that combines with this warrior psychology that Chief Koval was talking a little bit about. And we'll probably get into this more. Somewhere we lost the idea that we were guardians and became warriors. And I've never felt like a warrior. I've hated the war on fill in the blank, the war on poverty, the war on crime, the war on terrorism, the war. We throw words around in the society that all get blurred and therefore minimize the real meaning of the word. You know, a few years ago, rape was like that. You know, your home got broken into and people would say, yes, I feel like I've been raped. Well, I got news for you. If you've had your home broken into and in a separate occasion were sexually assaulted, I can guarantee you the impact is not the same. And so we've just kind of demeaned words, I think, over time, and that nullifies people's experiences and the validity of people's experiences. And so for me, I look at law enforcement as an extension of the government, but as a facilitator of the Constitution, not necessarily an enforcer of the law. And it's a different philosophy and a different way of looking at things. And I don't subscribe to the warrior complex, and I do still subscribe that education is one of the great equalizers. And where law enforcement begins in that process has to be at the birth and through all the way through the life cycle of the society. It can't just pick up and choose a time that it's going to engage with our community. It's got to engage all the time, and it's got to deal with whatever the community issues are that make this not work for everybody. And it's a tall order, but I think that really good minds in the profession of law enforcement are trying to figure this out. And then there's a lot of the rest that are just kind of going along, and things flare up and come to their desktops, and then they'll deal with it. But until it comes to their desktop, they're not going to. I think, though, that the profession has got a number of people who are really giving this serious thought and trying to figure out really the answers to incarceration rates, the cycle that just keeps repeating itself. And if we keep doing the same things over and over and expect a different result, that's not really going to work terribly well. So I think a lot of this is about education, a lot of it is about economic opportunity, and a tremendous amount is about there's just a fundamental unfairness there is not a level playing field, and anybody who says that we've gotten it more level, I think the way they measure level and the way I measure level are very different.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Thank you all. So there's a lot to chew on here, folks, yes? So on one hand, we have the characterization of the over-militarization of our local community law enforcement, a big question about the extent to which education, or the lack thereof, drives some of the challenges that are emerging in our communities. And Chief, I love this comment you're saying, we're way off if Dr. Rose's analogies and information is correct, more so than we realize. And one of the questions I just put to you all is, A, how do we get there? How do we get to the point where we're so off in terms of the demographic shift here in Madison? So, for example, Madison is not your typical town or community in the United States. We know nearly half of the residents here in Madison have college degrees, more so than most American communities. Yet, as Dr. Rose alluded to, about half of African-American students enrolled in MMSD, Madison Metropolitan Schools District, they aren't completing their high school diplomas. So he gave us stats on students at a much lower level. But when we look at them at high school and then we even start to have the conversation about college, it's just not happening. So there's a disconnect. I think that's a fair way to put it. How do we get that disconnect? And then more importantly, how do we correct it? And Chief, you alluded to this in some of your comments, talking about law enforcement engaging in the community and lack of trust in the community. And one of the things I want to ask you all to entertain and chew on is that trust factor goes both ways, right? So community members may be suspicious of law enforcement for good reason. Is there a sense, and to the degree that you can answer this, is there a sense that law enforcement have to be particularly suspicious in certain contexts or certain situations when we hear some of the real challenges we're dealing with? And I'd open the floor for any or all of you to respond to that.
Less is expected if I go first, probably. I think that at the end of the day, I think when you have some deep-rooted issues in terms of where everybody isn't starting from the same level playing field that the Chief has mentioned and Doctor mentioned, is that right from the outset, we have concerns because there's such an imbalance in terms of access to the institutional points of access, whether it be education, whether it be good housing, whether it be fair jobs, things of that nature. And in Madison, we have another sort of anomaly in that we are, in spite of all of our problems, I think something of a destination city. And so in that context, I'm dealing with a lot of families who, as any of us would want to, are actually moving to Madison in search of a better life, an opportunity to do more for their family and to expand upon what they've enjoyed heretofore. And so when you have folks coming from all parts of gosh knows where, but predominantly a lot of Chicago, Beloit, Rockford, Milwaukee and the like, the Twin Cities, all policing is not created equally. And some of those areas have good reason to be mistrustful based on what their historical past has been in those institutions. So from my perspective, we sort of, the MPD by that I mean, we also have a sort of an additional burden or hurdle, if you will, in the sense that how do we go about getting off on the right foot and saying to people, no, whatever your mindset may have been prior to getting Madison, give us a chance to show you how we like to engage in a relational way through our neighborhood officers, through our educational responding officers, because it can be done more equitably, and you can find that we will give you that measure of dignity and respect that is owed. But it's very difficult for us. It's if we have 2 strikes before you ever reach the batter's box, because those life and work experiences have become fairly solidified before we ever got to the city, and that's another daunting challenge.
Great.
Jump right in.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sure.
in a nutshell, change the economics. Currently, it's more advantageous economically to treat the issue rather than to cure it. And if you look at rural economic development, which are prisons, you can quickly see that it's disadvantageous from job creation to move the paradigm to something that becomes more humane and something that's more advantageous to our community long term.
Can you give us an example of what you're referring to, sir?
Well,
I know, but I'm not sure everyone else does.
I'm certain that the cost of a brick and mortar jail or prison is several times that what it would cost to enroll in a very good land-grant college like University of Wisconsin.
yes, I would also say for those statisticians in the audience or that are viewing this, take a look at how much money we spend with the Department of Corrections and then how much money we spend with all of the universities in our state. And I think you'll find that we spend more money with the Department of Corrections than all the money we spend for the universities. Now, if that is not an indictment to the insanity of which we're in, there is nothing like that. You know, there are a lot of good people that come up with a lot of good stuff, and this is an amazing university that develops policy from everything from Social Security to whatever. This is the birthplace of some of the greatest ideas in the world. And it is just so defeating when we take a look at some of the stuff that's going on right now and not to see a point of intersection where we can make some kind of transition or change. Because the way that we're going is not towards rectifying the problem, it's actually intensifying the problem. I focused on my initial remarks on children, because if you take a look at the cost that you have to put forth to correct what has been allowed to go in air, it's amazing. It's beyond comprehension. But if you take a look at trying to get to that child before those corrective actions have to occur, it's pretty minimal. But again, those of you that are educators, there was a wonderful program called Title I. It gave schools more money for poor kids. Almost like dope, schools have gotten to a point where they cannot live without Title I funding. It wasn't there forever. It was there to work our way out of a hole. It was put forth in the greatest of intentions. But now it's a situation where it's not that people have folk that lag behind that they try to continue so they can keep the pipeline going, but they have nothing to replace it. Again, our insanity is manageable if we recognize it to be insanity.
Chief?
Yeah, a number of thoughts. First, people say, Wisconsin is unique and it's a special place, and in many ways it really is. And there's a couple things I think, though, that we should look at and get far more vocal about. Minnesota to our west is basically the same economic structure, the same racial structure, the same population. We have more lakes than they do, but they brag a lot about it. But they only incarcerate a quarter of the number of people we incarcerate in the state. And we went down a path in Wisconsin that sounded so good when they brought it out, although I have to tell you, the police chiefs of the state actually opposed it, which is an interesting thing. And that's the 3-strike rule, that once you've done 3 things, you're going to be kept in prison for life. And we oppose that because that's just a real dead-end thinking, and it also explodes your prison population, which also explodes how much money prisons cost. And I had made the comment that Dr. Rose did that 2011 was a really sad year, and that was the first year that the state of Wisconsin put more money into the Department of Corrections than the state of Wisconsin put into the University of Wisconsin system, 2011. And if you think about that, that's not all the money that the University of Wisconsin has, right? Because each year the state support gets lower and lower and lower and lower, right? We're down about 14% now of our budget being state, and the rest of it, 86%, being other sources. But if you take us plus the other 25 UWs and you put it together, you get the amount, which is actually lower than the Department of Corrections budget. Because putting people away with 3 strikes costs money, because they're an aging population, and when you're young and in your 20s, you're more healthy, and you get out of prison and you maybe get the rest of your life in order. But if you keep people in, we're going to start needing all this geriatric help, and that costs money. And so we're really going to find ourselves in pretty bad straits here economically if the state doesn't revamp its correctional system. Never mind all the lives that it's ruining. We could do a whole panel on how prison ruins lives. And I don't want you to think, certainly I would not attribute this to Chief Koval without him saying it himself, but I don't want you to think that I'm some bleeding heart liberal police chief who doesn't believe in prison when it's needed and doesn't believe in locking up criminals. I'll put my enforcement rate against anybody's, but I go for quality, not quantity. And I go for what is the best intervention in that situation. And sometimes arresting people is the best intervention. And other times arresting people is not a particularly good intervention. And so I think that our politicians get themselves in these quick fixes. They get themselves in this slogan type atmosphere, 3 strikes and you're in. I mean, really, that's just, baseball gone bad. And I think the thing that's kind of scary to me, without naming, parties, but I think there's one political party that has a strategic plan. And that plan has been rolling out since the 1980s. And we are living with the results of that strategic plan. They're getting actually quite good at it. I think there's another party that doesn't have a strategic plan. It seems to go from issue to issue like a pinball, and it's moving around in such a way, it's very unorganized. And the strategic plan of the other party is very organized, it's very well funded, and it's playing out all over this country. And we are living the result. And I don't think the results are good, and I don't think the results are going to get better. I think they're going to get worse. And if you go back, I know I sometimes refer to history a lot, and people wonder, no, I didn't major in history, but I've found that if you don't know it, you're doomed. And it's President Eisenhower, believe me, and I'm taking a leap here, Patrick, but hang with me. President Eisenhower, who warned the country of the great military-industrial complex. And I don't think that it's coincidental that we have been in perpetual war in this country since the 60s. If it wasn't an actual war in Vietnam or wherever, it has been the war on poverty, the war on terrorism, the war on whatever, and it's this war footing that justifies so much railroading of issues and shuts down so much discussion. So I think we have to become far more strategic about this, because I do think charter schools and some of the bleeding of public funding for education is part of a larger strategic plan, and I don't think it's going to end well.
Yeah. So this leads me to my second question for us, and it seems that there's a bit of a cycle here, right? Where one challenge begets another challenge, and somewhere in the middle, the community at large is sort of caught trying to figure out solutions, how best to address and identify what the next steps should be. And so I put that to you again. From a law enforcement perspective, given everything that you all have just mentioned, it seems the deck is sort of stacked in a sense. What can be done to improve and have a positive impact without sacrificing the much-needed service that law enforcement gives us, or compromising the role that you all play from the perspective of public safety?
If I could answer that first, being the least qualified of the panel.
But probably the most correct.
Yes.
Good police get a bad rap. A lot of things that occur in the positions that they're put in are because of extremely ridiculous policy. If you take a look at some of the issues that are out there and the incarceration, and I first, as a sidebar, when I heard the industrial military complex, every baby boomer in the audience, their ears perked up behind that. The younger people have no idea what we're talking about here, but that's okay. But if you take a look at the policy that we ask our police to carry out, you'll find that it is very slanted, bogus, and in many cases puts them in a position that they cannot get out of. Many years ago in Milwaukee, and I don't know if it's still true, but if you were caught with marijuana, that was a jailable offense. Is that still correct?
I think they've become more enlightened and are moving towards forfeitures.
Yes.
Okay, they're moving towards that, but you would be jailed.
Yeah.
Every county, every city outside of Milwaukee, if you got caught with marijuana, you get a ticket. Now you think about that. You think about that real hard. Gee, who do you think was going to jail? Had nothing to do with the police per se. The police officer had to make a decision. Do I do what I'm told to do, what I'm paid to do, or do I create my own set of mores and standards by trying to do something that I think is right? They would get some kid in West Allis or Pewaukee and tell his mother, okay, he's got caught with marijuana, I don't want to ever see him again, take care of this. The kid in inner city Milwaukee, you're going to jail. That kid that goes to jail has a record. They're not going to get any financial aid. They're going to have a mark against them. They won't be able to get a decent job. In more than enough cases, we just took somebody to a life under the table rather than a life above the table. And it had nothing to do with the police. It was all about policy. There are policies right now that if two 17-year-old kids get into a fight, somebody's going to jail. 17-year-old. Back to who might be putting some of this forth, every police officer that I've spoken with will tell you this is insane. Raise the level to an age when the kids are not in school.
To my good colleagues, for those who don't know, if you're the offender in our state, at 17, you're automatically waived into an adult court of original jurisdiction. And so we've had that operative system in place for about 15 years now, and I do think I would concur that we have to raise that back to 18 years old, especially when you're dealing with high school populations. Good man.
And Chief, isn't it also true, same scenario, two 17-year-olds, the offender is quote-unquote tried as an adult, but they're also being tried as an adult against a juvenile, right? So
Right, so if a
in one
17-year-old's an offender,
17-year-olds,
that
they get
17-year-old who
Right.
basically does what would be tantamount to a misdemeanor battery causing bodily injury without consent to another, that's physical abuse to a child in our state, which would be a felony. So you could have one 17-year-old waived into an adult court charged with a felony, and the other 17-year-old is considered a child when victimized.
Right. Nice little twist.
I didn't mean to interrupt your stream of consciousness.
No, you were on a roll. That was
Well-
good. That was. The other side of that is that the community probably needs to step up. Nobody's going to take care of us but us. And as we oftentimes will look at the most horrific situation, we somewhat look at those that are sound bites or something that becomes big-time breaking news on CNN. But I ask you, where is the outcry when a little 9-year-old girl gets killed in a playground because all she did was be between two fools that were shooting at each other? What happens to the little 5-year-old girl that was sitting on her grandfather's lap? You know, who's breaking into Best Buy and stealing TVs because they're so outraged then? See, the deal is that, again, I'm not against bad police. I'm vehemently against bad policing. But I understand the undergirth of all this. A lot of it is policy, and a lot of it is the people in the community will not and have not stepped up.
So let me chime in then, because that segues to my next question, and you already given me your answer, but again, I'd love to put this to the whole panel. What do you need from the community? And Chief, I think I'm really interested, Chief Riseling, what do you need to address the challenges that are happening on this campus, right? From a community perspective, are there things we can be doing to assist you in your role and vice versa? What are some things, because I really want this to be about provocative possibilities, because if I stay here too long, I might get depressed, right? And I'm gonna need more than water to get me going, right? But more importantly, I think there is great power in this institution, a tremendous sense of pride and intellectual prowess that we can identify, be it policy, be it procedures, be it ideas that can shift the paradigm, certainly a step towards leveling the playing field that creates Madison as the kind of community that is not just for one set of individuals, right? When we talk about Madison, great place, most friendliest place for biking, great place for young women, great place for this, and I think someone said it earlier, I think Rebecca Ryan's comments, it is not a great place for people of color, right? So I put that to us to think about what do you need from us, and what are some things we can do collaboratively to shift the dynamic?
Well, I think what I would like to have, this is going to probably sound a little strange, but I'd like to have more invitations.
Okay.
I would like to be able to have more invitations to come and have conversations and dialogue about a student's reality, a police officer's reality, where those overlap and where they go opposite ways. Mm-hmm. I would like more invitations to have those kind of discussions. And discussions where we can get past the superficial, you know, are you okay, am I okay? And just let's get to the point of where we both start off with, we're both okay, we just may be different, but let's get into the meat of it. What causes the distrust, and how the stories get told through the community and how things spread, and at the end they don't look anything like the reality that occurred sometimes. And for the police, the same thing. Mm-hmm. We start the stories internally, and by the time it gets to the end, you go, what case are you talking about? And then you have to back way up to the beginning because the case is morphed into something it never was. So I think that's what I would really like is greater time and intellectual vigor, I think, around this issue, not just, you know, write it off, and not do it in the moments of emotion. I mean, I always get invitations like right after a Ferguson, you know, and hey, I'll take them, but that's usually not the best time at which to sit down and not just really have it be more of just an emoting session. Hey, which I'm all good with. I can sit and listen to folks emote and emote myself, but to really kind of start peeling that onion back, we need to be data-driven and kind of have a rational approach to this. And the data is overwhelmingly bad. Mm-hmm. So let's figure out why. And I do think part of it is policy, part of it is law, part of it is the way we choose to enforce the law too. We have a lot of discretion, and we're the gatekeeper to the system, and we can take a kid home or we can arrest them. And the question is, you know, why do we make the choices that we make about taking some kids home and taking other kids to jail? What is in the psychology of that? And I think that'd be fun. Okay, fun might not be the right word. Actually, I think it would be fun to discuss. Not everybody defines fun the way I do, though. So I think it would be really interesting to get that perspective of students and that perspective of faculty and staff as well. So I'd like more invitations. Not necessarily to the party, but although I do dance.
I think at a certain point, too, that we need to educate our voting constituents about the fact that there's a lot more activism that can be done. The good doctor made a reference to looking at decriminalizing marijuana across the state. There are many topical areas of misbehavior or bad contact that could also lend itself to forfeitures and thereby avoid the stigmatism of a criminal label. We have, I think everybody has been voyeuristic, we have CCAP. Well, the problem is CCAP is a sophisticated way of saying we've now created a rap sheet, a record of arrest and prosecution. An employer, a student registrar, they're not looking at the disposition code, they're just infatuated with the fact that you were arrested. If we could have a mechanism whereby if someone was put into a restorative court, a means of making that community whole again for the wrongs or misgivings that were done, and that there would be a way of systemically purging any vestige or trail of a CCAP, that benefits us all. The whole instance of how many people we're arresting for merely possessing drugs and warehousing people for that rather than looking at drug courts or treatment courts or deferment courts like that, I just don't think that that modality of punishing and warehousing has proven to be effective. In fact, quite the contrary. And as I said, there are so many things that are now starting to blossom in Madison. The Southwest side is going to be engaging in its first restorative court justice where community members, stakeholders can all take a part and provide a voice or find mechanisms in which to help when those resolutions are debated about how we can make the community whole in mentoring folks that have made some bad choices. So I do think that there's some hope.
Great. So I'm going to ask one final question, then we want to open the floor for comments or questions from the audience. And this one is sort of narrowing the conversation a little more at the 500-foot level. We've talked a lot about policy. We've talked about extenuating circumstances to a certain extent that are beyond the control of the officer or the law enforcement agent. Talk to me a little bit about the extent to which cultural competency is an opportunity area that is actively addressed in your respective roles, and the extent to which we can improve upon where our current procedures are, and if there are any immediate things that, again, an opportunity from the community to identify spaces where you could enlist support.
Well, I think in the last decade, the whole science that's becoming much more well-known and acted upon, the issue of bias and then unconscious bias, and something that we spend a tremendous amount of time on, whether it's cultural bias or whether it's racial bias or whatever it is, dealing with the fact that some of it's above the table and a lot of it's below the table, and how do you bring what you're not conscious of to the forefront and actually then begin to deal with it. And we spend a lot of time dealing with and talking about and training on the issue of unconscious bias, that it's there, and to check yourself when you are acting. And then the cultural competency, we used to call it like diversity training, and everybody would go, oh, good. But now it's like a inclusivity training, cultural awareness, the looking at diversity different, based on like physical ability in addition to social, economic, race, all of those things, and looking at diversity in a very different way than just the age-old kind of race diversity. And being able to talk about diversity in different formats and with different comparisons is a lot of the work that we've done quite deliberately in the last 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes a big difference when people encounter people unlike themselves on the street that they're having some law enforcement challenge with that they've got to work their way through. We're not there yet, but we have to keep pushing those ideas and those understandings.
Well, I think obviously so much of what we put out in the streets is based on whom we hire and how we train. And for me, you don't get to the front door. I'm a recovering recruiter of 17 years from Madison. It starts with character, it goes to competency, it goes to caring, and it goes your commitment. And when we say competency, to bootstrap what you said, Chief, in terms of the cultural competencies, you have to have a mechanism of testing through oral boards that have citizens who sit on them and reflect the interests of the community. You have to have essay components where you really begin to drill down on some of this stuff. My goodness, I would be the first to say I do not want 455 cops that all look like me with bad haircuts. That would be the worst possible component for a department. But when you can start to tap into what is their life experience, what is their work experience, how have they done things in their life with people who are different or out of the norm from their own creature comforts. And I think one of the seminal things we have to do is, are we training people, are we hiring people who will cultivate a vocation in law enforcement? I mean, that's a term that gets used as a euphemism. I have decided to embark upon a personal Don Quixote, Man of La Mancha, Mission Impossible, to never refer to it when talking about it as a Madison experience, because law enforcement, we can now quantify, takes up about 25% of what an officer does in any given day. So it doesn't begin to tell or express the tale of the needs of what that community needs. So much of what we do now is crisis mediation, diffusing people who are dealing with a mental illness episode, looking at collaborating with social services and providing needs, homelessness, and the list goes on and on. So if we can create sort of a profile for those who aspire to policing, understanding the much more comprehensive nature of the work, then you will cultivate a profession that has a social work mentality. And oh yes, you'll have to wear a gun and a badge because there are some instances when we have to have you use statutory powers of arrest. But I really do think we have to start at the outset, and those agencies that stand up and pat themselves on the back and say, well, we gave 12 hours of culpatory competency when they were recruits, as if you've got a one-time inoculation. That's so desperately naive and shallow. You have to have an ongoing commitment as part of your in-service regimen each and every year to ensure that you're continually putting it on the forefront of prioritization of what the officers are trained with.
And Dr. Rose, from the community perspective.
2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting where there was a discussion about community needs. And we broke off into tables of about 8 individuals, and there must have been about 12 tables around the room. And we started to talk about certain issues, and someone mentioned cultural competency. And at our table was a young man, a friend of mine, Vietnamese gentleman. And I asked the facilitator who worked for this agency, by the way, do you have any employees that are Southeast Asian, Hmong, Vietnamese? And the facilitator quickly said, no, but we have all these programs for Southeast Asian people and Hmong. And the question, I guess, or the rhetorical question that I kind of came up with, do you want to work with people or work for people? If you really want to make an indentation and have true cultural competency, you have true communication with those people of that culture on an ongoing basis, so you in turn have an understanding that is reinforced and you share ideas on an ongoing base. But if you want to do something for someone, expect a whole lot less.
Great, thank you very much. We've reached the point now where we'd love to interact and hear your thoughts and questions. How are we doing? We're all right? Yeah? Okay. So the floor is open. Otherwise, I can keep asking questions. I have some that I have here, but we'd love to hear from you all.
Hi. I've been working with Safe Walk for 3 years now, and when I came to UW, I was I expected to be working with sexual assault. I expected to be working with people stealing electronics, room break-ins, drunken people. I expected all that. What shocked me was the racial epithets being tossed around, people driving by in cars, yelling horrible things, people sitting on porches of houses yelling horrible things. And I've been worrying about this for 3 years, and I have no idea what to do about it. So I would love to hear any ideas for Safe Walk to do something, for us as a university to do something. People have got to be able to get from their home to school without being harassed. What can we do?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And I would say to a certain extent, part of what we're trying to do institutionally is affect a culture shift, right? That's a very hard thing to do, but it's at the root of, I'd say, 99.9% of the challenges that we're experiencing. So when you talk about slurs or racial slurs being hurled at other individuals, and all they're doing is just walking home to class or heading off to work, that's an environment and a space where we have opportunity to address, but there's a fine line, right, between, the freedom of speech conversation that often comes up when you talk about diversity training or language, the over political correctness, and I think, certain things or anything in an extreme can be problematic. But I would say part of it is you have to be vigilant, right? This is ongoing work that doesn't stop, and much like our law enforcement and our community relations, I think you have to have an all-hands-on-deck approach. So if you're in the vicinity or you hear these kinds of things, to the extent that you're comfortable, because recognizing that there's a certain balance or a line where you don't want to put yourself in harm's way, and that may look differently from person to person, but to the extent that you can speak up and challenge those notions, I would encourage folk to do so, and sometimes that's all it takes. It's the reminder that if I speak this way and no one challenges me, then I can assume that the person agrees to a certain extent with the way I'm talking about it. And once I've been disabused of that notion, perhaps I might shift my thinking and choice of words in the future.
To your point, though, I see that they just released the FBI crime statistics for 2013, and although our country is doing better in terms of property crimes and crimes against persons, the category I would like to look at when I get back to the office, because it was just released, is in the area of hate crimes, because I have a sense that those are on the uptick in terms of our community.
Hi, my name is Sherry Bester, and I've had some very wonderful experiences with the police department, and I've had some that have not been wonderful. But I thank you very much that you're here today, because I've called on the phone and I've emailed, and I'm happy to be able to talk face to face, and I value every one of your time very seriously. And I want to say that I have had wonderful experiences with the police department, because my husband, James Bester, won an award for saving a life, and I was in a room celebrating with the police department. In the 1980s, I was Sherry, someone else, before I got married, and I was poked with the drug on Halloween, and the police department rescued me and took me to the hospital. But also I'm Sherry Bester, whose son was arrested at school at 12 years old. I'm also Sherry Bester, who ran across the street to Penn Park when the murder happened. And I can go on and on and on when the young girls were in the fire screaming. I worked with that. I've called anonymously. I'm also Sherry Bester that had a mental breakdown, and I was just holding my arms, and the police dragged me away, took me in jail, and they were like, what in the world is she doing here? And I forgive all those experiences, but I come through many experiences. And today I was told that we're talking about the Wisconsin idea and not just campus. Well, I have 1 foot in the university campus and 1 foot on the south side. I started out here in 1980 as UW student. Now I'm also the higher position that I stand in of great pride and great honor and great love and great dignity and respect is being a resident of the south side. So I've worked with different neighborhood groups, and what I am here to ask is, is the police department in having these forums also ready to stretch 1 foot into the university and 1 foot to the south side, like the People's Program has done, and like Family Voices has done, and the Boys and Girls Club in a partnership where I'm the parent liaison, to get more scholarships, more mentoring, more team meetings, more reporting and results, and a place to report safely something you think that's getting ready to happen between campus and the communities, and not be betrayed and not feel like you're betraying either the criminal or the person, and where there's going to be help on both sides of the fence for the person. Because I'm saying I have children from the Boys and Girls Club, from the People's Program, from my own family. My son's a custodian here. My daughter is on campus here. And then I'm the parent liaison at the Family Voices Boys and Girls Club. And sometimes I hear things and I don't know where to take that and to say this might happen where it's safe and where I'm not betraying anyone and where help will come, where no one's dragged away because of their mental issue, or where no one's kicked out of this or that program, but where the victim and the victimizer of children, I'm speaking, will get the help that they need. I have this dream, but I don't know where to start it. And I see it starting in many places, and hope people will come together in unity and not compete against each other, because I see this happening, but I don't know what direction to go in and reporting things where I want, and also where I want to see people are ready to mentor, people are ready to help with little amounts of money for scholarships, to give what they have to give. And I'm talking about people that are considered to be nobody and that are poor and that can't say things to poise or do things to poise, but do it how they know to do it. Mm-hmm. And as we speak of education and teaching people, I know groups of people I've met with that are afraid to come to the mic, that are afraid to dial the phone, that are afraid to come to a meeting here, that has 1 foot stretched at the university and 1 at the south side, 1 on the west side, 1 on the east side, that don't know how to speak with poise, to the poise of what poise is said, or know where to report, or where to say, can I help with a scholarship? I only have $5. Or can I help mentor, or can I help? And the People's Program does that, Family Voices does that, so I see the university doing it, but who just want to come with what they have to give and say, then will you educate me? Because you guys are speaking of education. Well then, is everyone really ready for that? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to go on and on.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure we're able to answer the question, because you gave us about 20 of them.
Okay, well, my question is, are you ready for, as you open up these forums and as you open up these talks, I believe in them all, and as action goes forth, are you ready for the action of people that are coming like me, with foot stretch in different places?
Got it.
Coming whatever I have to say, I have something to give to community, to mentoring, to tutoring, to teams, to reporting, and to results, and that people can come, because I've been meeting with many people to say, can we come? Can we come? Can we come? Can we come? Can we really come? I don't have a route of transportation to come here. I'm afraid. Can we come? Are you ready for that? That's what I'm asking.
Got it.
People that have been talking are ready to do some action,
Right.
but might not meet, your requirements.
I'd say bring it on. I mean, I think we want, let's, it might take a little organizing, and, as you say, the money might not be great, copious amounts. I probably won't name the football stadium after you or anything, but the fact of the matter is that what you're describing is what we actually need more of. We kind of need the average person to just take whatever step they can take. It doesn't have to be huge, but any step is welcome, I think, at this stage. I think we're all flummoxed, quite frankly, in how to go forward. And I think that's because the conversation has been pretty bottled up. And the more people we talk to, we're going to get better. It's broader, and I just think more heads are better. So yeah, I like it when communities are engaged. I can't imagine that you...
To have someone's card from the police department to bring forth these people.
Sure.
Because we have been meeting, and we just don't know exactly where
Yeah,
to go.
absolutely.
We're not in competition of anything other than to bring forth whatever it is that we have with 1 foot at the university.
Yeah.
With the People's Program and the Odyssey Program
Yep.
and Family Voices and Boys and Girls Club, all these children are coming. And everything we're talking about, these children really are coming.
Mm-hmm.
This is more than a pretty riddle or a pretty rhyme. They're coming. and in them coming, the parents are also ready to give with whatever
That's
it is
great.
they have to give.
Yeah, I mean, I think the university has several different touch points. I assume the city does as well. I think about the Mortgage Center for Public Service and the volunteers that they have that go out into the community and mirroring some of those programs so that people don't have to physically necessarily travel even to the campus, because that can be hard. You know, you start thinking about childcare and all those other things to make a meeting here at the campus where the university's got tremendous outreach that we can bring to the neighborhood too. And I think there's lots of connections we could make.
I would just like someone to card them.
You bet.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. A couple questions here? Yes.
Hi. So I listened to both of you, police chiefs, and I think they speak just like my people. I'm really impressed with what you have to say, which brings for me, on the one hand, great hope, and on the other hand, a level of cynicism, because really all but one of my experiences with police in my 30 years here in Madison have been very unpleasant, to say the least. The one positive one was with UW Police, by the way. I'll give you a quick example, very recent, very small. I'm going to court tomorrow to challenge a parking ticket, as tiny as that. When I called to make the appointment, the cop, the police officer, I don't know, that I talked with was really extremely hostile and pleasant. I actually, before I hung up, I told him he was very unfriendly. And then I thought, I was just talked to as though I was a major criminal, because I dared just call the police, I suppose. And so, and of course, this is, as I said, a tiny little example. I personally have had much worse examples, and a lot of people I know have had them too. So I do have a few questions to pose to you. One is, how do you explain the difference between what I hear from you and what I and many others experience on the street or in our homes or whatever? Question number two is, do you speak like that also when you go to meetings of chiefs? And if so, do they hear you? And what kind of response do you get? And taking me to question number three, which is, I believe that you believe what you say, in which case, where do you find hope for change in the near future? Thank you.
Well, I'd start off and just say that I've been a police chief for 23 years, and when I started as a police chief, I would talk and people thought I was insane. In the 23 years, that has changed quite a bit, and many more police chiefs, I think, hold the philosophy closer to mine than did 23 years ago. Not all do. When I stand up in Wisconsin and talk this way, they definitely believe that I'm just from that liberal university in that liberal city, you know, of Madison, and they quickly kind of dismiss sometimes what it is that you say. When I speak nationally, which I do quite often, I find there are more major city police chiefs that are beginning to swing much more than there were, say, 10 years ago. I believe that it starts at the top of a police organization and how you lay out the philosophy and the values of the organization, and then it moves through the culture of the agency. And many times people in law enforcement are part of departments that their leadership has changed so quickly at the top so often that what the leader says doesn't have a lot of consequence. That's one of the downsides of American law enforcement. There is a big gulf between sitting in a room like this and talking about these things at the 10,000-foot level and going outside onto the street where your personal safety is at risk and having to have this conversation one-on-one or one-on-three or whatever you're facing. And in the back of the mind, if the police officer starts with the core principles in that interaction, they're going to get a different result than police officers that don't have those core principles embedded in their psyche. So it seems to me that one of the things I've known since I've started 23 years ago here at UW-Madison, because I came from out of state, and Mike has been in the profession the same length of time I have, but it's been all with Madison, is that for the most part, the heads of our agencies, the UW and Madison, have had a very similar philosophical approach to law enforcement for the last at least 25 years. That is not common. That is not a common philosophy. It is not pervasive throughout our profession. And it is an uphill battle that I've debated for a lot of years now with my colleagues from around the state and around the country. I can tell you it's getting better, but it's still, we're still not in the majority, I wouldn't say.
No, to both of your comments, ma'am, and you, first of all, I want to apologize on behalf of the Madison Police Department. That's not part of our mission or our core values, and to the extent that that wasn't the occasion for which your engagement took place, then it's on us. I'm responsible for that because at the end of the day, we want to be authentic when we say that we have a customer focus and we have values that are counterintuitive to what you've described. So I apologize. Secondly, I think, as you mentioned, we are trying to dare to be different, but we are running up against some sort of cultural things in our occupation that I don't mean to suggest are as an excuse, but I offer it to some extent to get an understanding or an insight. I have what I call the 95-5 rule. And that is whether you're a UW professor, a cop, an attorney, an accountant, any demographic you choose. My predicate is that 95% or more, pick the group, are meeting and exceeding those societal standards that we all hold dear. 5%, give or take, are the ones that are creating the tabloid journalism and the mistrust and bad community relations, whatever you want to call it. When you're a police officer, especially a police officer working the more hardship nights, I spent most of my career 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., my 6 days in a row, I have a disproportionate impact on the 5%ers. I am seeing as a staple in my diet the maddest, the saddest, and the baddest of that 5%. Disproportionately so. I get my 95s, but not as much as my 5%. And unless we create a health and wellness infrastructure, a peer support group that calls out and makes sure that we do not fall prey to those institutional vagaries, I can see where an officer could be impertinent, rude, caustic, all of those things, insensitive. And we have to be better. The other thing that's been an incredible struggle to me is I have an internal academy that runs for 6 months. At the end of that time, I feel confident that I've imbibed them with the best practices of what we have to offer, both in terms of the intangibles and our values and the skill sets they need to do the job proficiently. But once they leave the academy and they find their way into the culture of the field training officer and that peer group, there again, have I done enough? Clearly not. To reinforce those best practices and not let them backslide. And that's a constant challenge for me as a chief. And I'm just a baby chief. I've been here 7 months, so I can't comment on my colleagues.
Got a question here, and we have two over here, right?
Hello.
Hi.
Chief Riseling, I want to thank you for bringing up implicit bias. And my question relates to that and what you've been talking about here, and also K-12. So as I've seen studies recently that talk about how teachers perceive preschool kids and imaginative play, for instance, and the characteristics that these kids are judged for who are white in imaginative play are judged very positively, whereas the same characteristics in children who are African American are judged negatively. And I see that translate into how Madison School District, for instance, and other districts around the state or around the country are dealing with our children of color. And I think that the policing is starting early. It's starting very, very early. When you look at the data that comes from the U.S. Department Civil Rights Data Collection, it breaks down the in and out of school suspension rates by school. So I've looked up my children's school. They go to Leopold. And I've seen how disproportionate it is. And white children are being underrepresented in those categories. And children of color, particularly black children, are being overrepresented. And thinking about then the overrepresentation of particularly African Americans in our prison populations, how can we as a community in Madison specifically work with K-12, work with the institutions of higher education, the community, law enforcement, to specifically tackle the implicit bias? Because the bias that we're having here, it's not about people being ill-intentioned. We all have biases. Some of them may be. But they come out, and they come out in situations where you have to react quickly, where we are relying on instinct, how we've been taught. And in our country, we have socially been taught that white people are superior. So how do we tackle that as a community to make this better?
Let me do this before we answer the question.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the hour, and
Yes.
I have two other individuals here. Can I suggest we get the two questions, and we can then respond to the final three in the order that we see fit? So let me take these other two questions, and then we'll come back to address the implicit bias question, and then these two amongst the panel.
Hi, my name is Phil Thornton. I'm also born and raised in Madison and have lived many other places, but I've always come back here. I first came to the university in 1965 as a student. I first came here as an employee in 1979. I've seen many things go on here in the community. This is an activist community, or it used to be. This is a place where civil rights marches happened, anti-war marches happened. Many, 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 many activist things have happened over the years. And it's something that can happen again. I don't think that really you're going to make essential changes in some of these basic things without engaging people to go forward and to bring other people into it on the basic citizen level. That's my feeling. I'm not saying it's right. It's just the way I feel about it, and it's what my years of experience have shown me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Adrienne White, and I work at University Health Services, and I'm also a mother of two African-American boys, male men now, actually. And for me, I've always felt fear when it comes to the police department in Madison and in Chicago, where I'm from originally. And so my question kind of piggybacks off of my friend Este's question too. My fear started in the 1960s when I was living in Chicago, and there were police tanks going down my street because of revolts that were happening during those years in the 60s. And then having two sons and raising them as a single mom, and both of them having had interactions with the police department, both in Chicago and Madison. Fortunately, neither one of them ever had a police record, and both of them have graduated from college. But still, you know, you talked about education, Chief Riseling, being the answer. I think it helps, but it's not the entire answer. Both of them have college degrees, They were both very anxious to get out of Madison, felt that this wasn't the place for them and certainly would not be a place for them to raise their children. So they're both college educated and they're in another state, but I still every day fear because, you know, they're African American and I know the statistics in this country, the fear lives in me every single day. So I guess the question that I had was, and you answered this a little bit about the current climate within the Madison Police Department in terms of, you mentioned, you know, kind of the warrior mindset and even the magazines that come through in the department. So how is this addressed? And what is the current climate within the police department, and what are some of the challenges you face? I really appreciate your comments. It's the first time that I've heard this kind of talk from the police department, and I really do appreciate your comments and the work that you are doing in the community. But I have a sense that you are unique, and I think you have said that, and that's not really what's happening among most folks within the department. So I'm just wondering about that and what some of the things you're doing and what can we do to help with this kind of relationship that communities have had with the police department that is built on fear, mostly.
How do you want to handle?
Well, we have the three questions. We have implicit bias. We have a comment more so that is a suggestion of civic engagement, sort of a grassroots approach, than this question of addressing fear. I put it to you to tackle whichever one you see
Keep
fit.
looking at me.
And
so
even though we have our chiefs here, don't forget that part of why I wanted a community liaison here, and believe me, we did look for other cultures, because I know somewhere I'm sure somebody's tweeting, he only got black people up there. Want to be mindful that we reached out to a number of constituencies to assure that we had different representation addressed here, so I want to put that on the table. But I think there is something significant about the role that Dr. Rose plays in the community, particularly as it relates to African American, but I'm mindful that there are other constituencies, groups here that also need attention and support. So I want to put those things out there. So we can have that one or all of the above together, but I'm comfortable going over a little time, so we're at time right now, but if we want to keep going, we can keep talking.
I can at least start out real quickly. I think one of our issues is, what do they say in a recovery program? The first step to recovery is to acknowledge you have the problem. And so to that point, we have obviously incorporated Professor Patricia Devine's curriculum on unconscious bias, and it's a part of our training for the recruits as they go through. They get 6 hours on unconscious bias, among other things, as just a preliminary thing, and then we constantly revisit these issues during the course of their ongoing education. And so I think that at least we're taking a step in the right direction, acknowledging that that is, in fact, a part of who we are, or what makes us. So let's acknowledge it and work with it. With respect to the gentleman who came up and talked about the activism, good for you. I would like to see our police officers embrace their role as constitutional officers of the court. When we see crowds, I've gone the whole time, so I'm going to have to use the F word. We don't use the F word in Madison. Ferguson is not polite. But I do think that we look at our crowd management different than crowd control. And in so doing, I'd like to believe that we're championing the capacity of First Amendment rights of assembly and speech in facilitating it as opposed to impeding it. And then finally, with respect to your comments, ma'am, again, well, first of all, congratulations on getting kids through college. I'm still working on that last one, and I tip my hat to you. The other thing is that's a sad commentary to me in so many ways, is because this is obviously the side of Madison that I'm hearing more and more about in my official role. And as a chief, I've gone to the various districts twice now with community forums. I'm activating as many constituent voices as I can find to sort of invest their time and their energy with the department in counseling me. I don't know what I don't know, and that has been illuminating, to say the least. And I would also ask that you hold us accountable. I think there's probably a lot of inappropriate behavior that goes unchecked, unfettered, because you sort of waved your hands in resignation. We need to be held accountable so that we can bring these things to light. Be a good witness. Let us know.
Regarding the implicit bias, I can only speak to the Madison School District. There are 2,875 teachers. There are 75 that are African American, 50 female, 25 male. I'm very familiar with Leopold. I'm involved in 2 programs at Leopold, one called Kappa Kids and the other one a reading program. I believe that if we are to make a substantive change in behaviors, we need to hire people who can augment that change. I applaud what both chiefs are doing about hiring, because I've been a witness of their aggression to make sure that their force reflects the constituency that they serve. Regarding the activism, being a kid of the 60s and 70s, I find that oftentimes we may not be where we think we are, and that some of the liberalism and progressivism is somewhat pseudo-liberalism and pseudo-progressivism, and that it's a falsetto more than it is a reality. And to the young lady who has 2 sons, I too have 2 sons. And I believe that the best offense, or best defense, is an offense, and that is to be engaged with the forces to be beforehand. I think that I made a comment about the community stepping up, and that's what I meant, that the community needs to be in everybody's face on an ongoing basis. As they say, the best time to acquire a banker is when you don't need one. The best time to formulate a relationship is when it's not crisis. And I think that here in Madison, and I know that there are folk that are not always going to follow the lead of the 2 people I have on my left and right, but I do believe, and from their experience and my experience with them, that we have an opportunity to have honest communications, and that we should take advantage of that at every juncture, so that when something is awry, we know who we can deal with and who to call. And just for those that say, that may not be all truth, I personally have Chief Koval's personal cell phone number. I didn't ask for it. He came and gave it to me and said that if there is anything that we can work on together, call me, and here's my personal cell phone number. We, through Chief Koval, Chief Riseling, and Chief Noble Ray, we've been well served. Thank you.
I guess I'll just kind of wrap up to say that I don't know what school teachers get as far as implicit bias training, and that might be something that the next time I see the superintendent, because I do get to see her periodically, that I'll talk to her about, because I think that until we trained about it, what is it, how does it affect you, how does it affect the decisions that you make, really it was unconscious in and we weren't really thinking it through. We certainly were thinking through overt bias, but we weren't thinking through kind of what you don't know can hurt you kind of stuff. So I think that'd be interesting. You know, Madison does have a very, if you will, reputation for being kind of liberal and being activist. I don't see it. It's gone down quite a bit in the last 20 years since I've been here, with the exception of maybe the Act 10 protests that we saw back in 2011. But I really don't see it as being as active. You know, people say, oh, the campus is very active. And, you know, the number of protests and demonstrations we see every year has actually gone down over my 20 years of being here. But we do deal with crowds differently here in this area of the state and in this area of the country. And I even wrote a book about that. So, you know, go to Amazon and look up my name and find the book.
We can get autographed copy, right?
You can get an autograph. You really want to help local business, go to the independent bookstores in Madison. They have the book as well. And support local. You know, as far as your African-American sons, I wish I could have some words of comfort to say, you know, please don't be afraid. But the fact of the matter is that, and this is, you know, I'm a white female. When I'm certain parts of the state or when I'm out of state, I don't feel all that, and I'm a cop, and I don't feel all that warm and fuzzy. If and when, not often, but if and when the red and blue lights turn on behind me, either. And why is that? You know, and I ask myself, gosh, you're a cop. You know what's going to happen. You know you were speeding. Get your butt over there and roll down the window. Put your hands on the steering wheel. You know, and all that kind of stuff. But there is that factor, and there are too many examples today that I only wish I could address your fear, but there's good reason why you're afraid, and I wish there weren't good reason. But there are good reasons why you're afraid, and law enforcement has to recognize that and do better. I mean, that's really it. But I certainly understand why you have that fear. That's a very real thing in our society, sadly, but it's true. I don't believe, and Chief Koval, you may agree or disagree, I do not believe that there are many, if any, and I know this will probably meet with some controversy, many, if any, police officers that go to work wanting to have an encounter in which deadly force is the outcome. I don't think that they go consciously into those encounters. I really genuinely think they go into the encounter and they're almost not conscious of what's transpiring to the point of where things end up very, very badly. But I don't believe that it's always a conscious step. I don't. Because I do think that the profession has enough things in place to get the real problem people out of the profession. But I can understand the fear, and I wish it wasn't there.
Well, let me just chime in and say thank you to each and every one of you. It seems like we've only scratched the surface. There are a lot of issues, the relationship between education, our penal system, and some of our policy decision-making. We actually talked about the extent to how many folks we wanted on this panel. Did we want to have someone from MMSD to be on the panel as well? Do we want to have someone from Department of Corrections? And in the interest of time, knowing we only had an hour and a half, we felt this was the team to go with initially. But I'm very clear, my sense is it's worth having the kind of conversation and continuing it with some of those other folks, yes? Yeah? Great. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.